Then the chase continues. And I realize, like, oh, the enemy, like the person I'm like, what is going to give me closure? It's not this man and raining hell on him. It's actually understanding my family and learning to love them while learning me and learning about the truth of what happened to her.
Hello, my grieving friends. It's your host, Lisa Keefauver. Welcome back to another episode of Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. Now, just in case you're new to the show, yes, this is a podcast all about grief. We explore the expansiveness and the pervasiveness of grief in our lives. What I've learned over my 20 plus years as a social worker and the more than a decade I've spent now as a widow is that if we lean in and hold space, bear witness for one another in the most difficult seasons of our lives, that's where true connection and healing and community building happens. Now, I'm thrilled to share my conversation today with Susan Lieu. She's a multi-hyphenate storyteller, activist, and author, helping people live the stories they've always wanted. Her award-winning solo show, 140 Pounds, How Beauty Killed My Mother, evolved into her debut, and I have to say, truly extraordinary memoir, The Manicurist Daughter. It also happens to be an Apple Book of the Month choice. It's been featured in the New York Times and on NPR. Through her book, her podcast, and live performances, Susan takes audiences on a journey of healing, intergenerational trauma, embracing authenticity, and finding boldness in vulnerability. In this episode today, we explored many of those topics, the complexities of grief beliefs shaped by family dynamics, the silence surrounding loss, and the impact of cultural context on mourning. Susan reflects on her mother's legacy, the circumstances of her death, and the cascading losses that followed, including profound shifts in family structure and identity. The conversation highlights the importance of being seen and heard in the grieving process, and she shares a bit about the role of art in healing. She shares her profound journey of grief, justice, and self-discovery following the death of her mother, and the complexities of carrying grief, the quest for accountability, and the transformative power of performance art in processing her experiences. Through her exploration of family dynamics, she uncovers the shared pain and resilience within her own family, ultimately leading to a deeper understanding of love, compassion, and the importance of living with intention. I can't wait for you to meet her. Susan, welcome to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. I am thrilled to be in conversation with you today.
Such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Listeners heard at the top of the show a little bit about your story, which we're going to dive in deep. They heard about your one-woman show that in its 5th iteration was called 140 Pounds, and about your incredible memoir, The Manicurist Daughter, which I was saying off air, but I'm going to say it on air. I had the honor of reading so many memoirs for this work that I do, and I really do think about it as an honor. And this is really like the top most exquisite memoir I've read. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might be seeing that it's literally, I mean, I had to stop with the sticky notes because it was just getting a little absurd.
You're like, if I'm highlighting
I'm like, the whole book? I was that student in school too, by the way, that it was just like, anyhow. So I'm just thrilled to dive in today. There are so many themes that I can imagine we're not even going to be able to cover in an hour. I will do my best to help us pull some of the threads that I thought were uniquely resonant to your story and yet so familiar to so many of us who've experienced profound losses in these ways. And so we're going to weave together your story just like you did in your book so beautifully, helping us understand the context of your family's lineage, your story here, what you learned along the way as you sort of revisited the story and discovered something new. But I want to invite you to start our conversation where I invite all my guests over the last 6 seasons, and that's with this invitation, as a social worker, grief activist, I'm always curious, where did we learn the grief beliefs that we hold? That's what I call them. And of course, it has a cultural context, but for all of us, we learn them. Some of the most influential and informative grief beliefs we hold are by the ways in which the adults in our lives, when we face our first loss, explicitly or implicitly model behaviors about what grief should or shouldn't like and look like. And so I always ask every guest, whether it's a death loss or not, to take us back to an early loss that happened in your family. And what do you think the behaviors of every family taught you about what grief should look like? However, saying that, I'm wondering whether your mom's passing was your first profound loss. So I just offer that as however you want to answer this question.
Yeah, absolutely. My first loss was my
Okay.
mother's when I was 11 years old,
Okay.
and she had died from a botched tummy tuck. And I remember when she was in a coma, my aunt was like, "Ask her, try harder, tell her to come back. It's on you. Do it." And I just kept begging my mom to come back, saying, You said you'd go to college with me, and so come back so we can go to college together. And this is all layered with the fact that on the last day when the last talk to her, I told her I hated her.
Yes.
And so now I'm sitting here begging her to come back and thinking, oh my God, it's my fault because
an adult in your life, to my question, is kind of literally naming that this is somehow your 11-year-old responsibility.
You need to try harder here. And and so I'm thinking, oh my God, she's not going to come back because I told her I hated her. I'm like a disobedient daughter. I'm the worst. Why would she want to come back to me? So then we just go right into the funeral. On that day, I remember elders just, patting me on the back, being like, do well in school. And even then, I didn't know what my mom died of. Like they just kept saying in Vietnamese stomach surgery instead of a botched tummy tuck and losing oxygen to her brain and not having an anesthesiologist. Like I didn't know the story. Yes. I just knew stomach surgery. And then that night after the funeral, I'm getting my school clothes and my dad goes, "Oh, just take some time off." And I was like, okay. And so I take a week off from school. I have nothing better to do than watch Price is Right and eat cereal. And I go to the library, check out a lot of books. At home, when they come home from the nail salon, we have pretended like nothing has happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are not checking in with each other. We from this point forward, for the next now almost 3 decades to this day, my family has never spoken of my mother ever again, or how she died, or if any of us are doing okay. And then I go back to school.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned about grief.
That's what you learned. Yeah.
You just go back to work. You just go back to school and you never actually talk about the person ever again.
Yeah. Well, I wondered that as I was thinking of, after devouring your book and thinking about this question that I ask everybody about whether your mom's death was the first one. And we're going to dive into that specifically about, of course, her story. And I want to bring her life into the room, not just her death into the room. So what you want to share with us about her: courageous, tenacious comes to mind. Yeah. Fearless. But one of the things I wanted to name in your story, though maybe it feels extreme to you, having done this work for so long now, it's frightening how common the "we're not going to talk about it anymore" theme is, and get back to work and get back to school. And they wouldn't want you to whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Distract yourself, get bad grades.
Yeah. But one of the themes, I mean, I'd be jumping ahead a little bit, just when you said that about, even 3 decades later, we're not talking about both how she died and what were the circumstances, but also just the grief of not having her in your life. You touched on something so profound in the book, and I think I've heard this in other interviews that I've listened to in researching for today's show, but early on, there's sort of 2 places where you really talk about how harmful it is to be walking this grief alone. And that the way in which your family is, pushing back against you to just move on, as listeners might have heard in the top of the show, and as we'll explore, that you're investigating the sort of malpractice of her death, then you're starting to build it into this incredible one woman show. all the details of her life, part of what you're railing against is like, I need to know because nobody's talking about it and I can't do it alone. If you don't mind, there's there's a passage that you offered you later on. I'm sorry to spoil it for readers, but it's not. You go see a psychic with your sister and maybe your brother, I think.
Are you talking about Uncle Number 9 or Psychic Cindy?
Psychic Cindy.
Yes, that was actually by myself.
You did go by yourself.
Yeah,
okay.
But I shared the recordings with my family.
You shared the recordings with your family because one of the things you said is you had this anticipation and they shared a lot of insights maybe about your mom. And you thought maybe by them listening, now's the time. Like, we're going to talk about it. We're going to navigate this together. And you said that. You said in your book, a part of me felt hopeful because all of them listened. They wanted to know if Ma had a message for them. We all did. But no one spoke to my sobbing on the recording. I found it disheartening that they could listen to all of that and not ask the simple question, are you okay? Or admit their own grief. I didn't need the living to fix anything. I just wanted to be heard and do the same for them. That's it. At the core of it all, isn't it? That's it. We want to be seen and held.
Yeah, not fixed. Just hold space for me, see me, validate me, affirm me, and also know that this shared experience, the worst experience of our lives, that actually I was not alone.
Yeah. Which makes the suffering so much more unnecessarily devastating.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like my 2 siblings have watched the show. 2 siblings have read the book, and 1 sibling and my father hasn't done either. And it's just so crazy because I have showed it in so much detail. I played them on stage, and yet they can only talk about me doing the work of the art, but we cannot still, to this day, have a real private conversation. Okay. I've invited them on stage as part of post-show discussions, and they'll come on stage, but they can only talk about me doing the work.
It's like almost you as a character or as an art. Because I saw that 2 of your siblings were in a like post Q&A after the latest performance, and that there was some insight, but still it was more distant, maybe like third person or something. Yeah,
but but at the same time, there's a turn, right? Because there was a time in my life where I would tell them about the shows, 1 through 4 iteration, and they were like, not going to watch it. No, thanks. Like, what are you doing? You want attention. And so at least there's a turn where they're here to like receive the information. Stage. And there was this one point where a moderator asked my brother, like, what do you think? He's like, oh, it's great. Now I can just like hand the book to my son. I don't have to tell him anything.
My gosh.
So we all grieve in our own ways.
Yes, of course.
Right. And if anything, I have completely bared everything to them and the public. But the difference here is my healing and my closure isn't contingent on them anymore. It was contingent on the work that I had to do for myself, because I finally had this aha moment and like, oh yeah, they aren't going to talk.
Yeah.
So I've got to go find answers myself.
Yeah. And that's part of what you did throughout this book. And I want to kind of, sort of set us a little to the beginning, your own investigation of what happened to your mom, and also your own investigation among family members, some of which there was sort of a cleave or a split after your mom died, some who are here in the US, some were in Vietnam. And I felt almost, guttural desperation to answer, who is she? Who was she? Like, tell me about her, because as an 11-year-old girl losing your mom, there's so much of like, we don't see our parents as anything but parents when we're that young. They're not women or humans. They're just, whatever, of service to us. But I want us to go back, and I believe I recall your mom's Americanized name. The one she used in the salon was Jennifer, but I know that was not her given name. But
yeah.
So I want to invite you to bring her into the room first. Like, who was she, or who is she? Because some people like to talk about lost people in the current. So however you want to talk about that.
Yeah. Her Vietnamese name is Ha Thuy Phung. And she was a courageous mother, nail salon owner, 2 nail salons. 8 years old when she passed, and she was a baddie because she grew up in the Mekong Delta in a rural one road town, and she had to quit high school in ninth grade, but she was super smart. And around her, post-Vietnam War, she's seeing everyone trying to escape as boat people. And she's like, I don't have the money to do this, but I'm going to make my money. So she starts an underground lottery operation, wins at her own game 3 times, gets enough money to take her, my dad, and 2 brothers and try to escape. But every escape is foiled until the 6th attempt. And this is like getting lost in the jungle, getting caught by the communists, like being at risk, like my father being risked to like go to labor camps and go into prison. Like there is so much at stake. Everyone knew that if you try to leave on that boat, you're having a 50% chance of survival. There's the Thai pirates who rape you, who steal things, who murder you. And yet it was worth that gamble. So she leads them to a Malaysian refugee camp. Eventually we find ourselves in the Bay Area. And within 8 years, she and my father buy their first home.
Yeah. She has 2 salons.
Yeah. Eventually she has 2 salons.
Okay.
Because then she's like, okay, here's the game in America. You got to get off welfare and then you can sponsor over your family.
Yes.
We get off welfare, right? After she starts a nail salon. Then she like sponsors over her parents, her 3 sisters, a cousin. And then we began to build the army in our nail salon to build our nail salon empire.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talk about tenacious is a word that comes to mind to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I don't want to glamorize too, like that also is traumatic.
It was all traumatic,
means
yeah.
that both your mother and your father, like refugees around the world, were, and particularly that experience of like not knowing whether pirates are coming on board or, you know, all the despair are in a fight or flight state. And I just bring that up to say that we can hold the both and of like, what a powerful story and how incredible, but also how that might have influenced how your mom saw her role as a businesswoman, as a mother, as a wife, as a, you know, person in this country, the person in this country with the beauty standards such that as it is. So just like putting the context there, I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, she was the CEO of our family, right? And she was managing so much, and she has 4 kids. And so for me, I'm like, I feel like a minion, like a small pawn in the operation, and I barely have any time and memories with her. Right?
Because she works 7 days a week.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I didn't have daycare. I didn't have summer camp. I was also working in the salon as early as 6 years old with my sister, doing all the things. I mean, my sister was actually
pouring tea. I remember you were just describing all the little games and little tasks.
Or I would like be the charismatic one to convince people to stay when we were running late.
Yeah. Just 10 minutes, just 10 more minutes. We're good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing her. You know, whenever I invite somebody on the show who's lost somebody, who's someone they love has died, I feel often that we talk about the death. And I do want to talk about that because it's so integral to your own experience as a griever and to your story and to the play and to the book because of the malpractice and because of what's happened. I just wanted to name that I think it's so important that we create spaces like this. And just to your point, what you're talking about, like, I just want someone in my family. We need places where we can also bring their life into the room. Oh, I love it. Oh, if you guys are watching, you get to see this beautiful picture of you and your mom around food, which that was a big deal. Food was a big deal.
Yeah, this is the grand opening of Susan's Nails, our first nail salon. And there's chow mein. There's a big vat of fish sauce.
Yes.
And there's egg rolls. But of course there's food. It's celebration.
Of course. Exactly. I love it. And there's even some beautiful photos in the book, y'all. So if you get a copy of the book detailing the different places. And I remember one of your friends said, your mom really loved to be in heels on a rock.
Yeah. She had 5 photos.
Yes. Yeah.
So she's so fashionable. She had heels in every color and she looked fabulous.
Yes. Well, and that's the context there. So she looked fabulous. She was working in the beauty industry, in this nails industry. As you said, raising 4 kids, being the CEO of the house, being the CEO of the company, also kind of being responsible for the relatives who have come here. And I think any person in modern, in this era, here we are in 2024, recognizes even with 1 kid now, with all the resources that you have, we were just talking about before air, how we can lose ourselves when we become parents and we aren't seen as anything but of service to other people or like a conduit. And I know you spoke about, well, I want to invite you to tell us a little bit about the surgery that your mom chose to have and the consequences and about her death. But also, I think what's important is the context that when you first learned of what happened and why, there was a lot of understandable anger, like, why would you choose this? And then maybe later on, we'll talk about the distance and the perspective that you have now as a grown woman with your own child. But tell us a little bit about what led to your mom's death and the context that it takes place. And
Yeah. She went in for a tummy tuck, the narrowing of her nostrils, and a chin implant, and figured she'd be home the next day with her beautiful new body. 2 hours into the operation, she lost oxygen to her brain. The plastic surgeon waited 14 minutes before he made the 911 call because he could not resuscitate her. And typically after 4 minutes without oxygen to your brain, you have permanent brain damage. She goes into a coma, and after 5 days, she flatlines. Most common follow-up question, oh my God, did this happen in Vietnam? And I go, no, it happened in San Francisco, 1996. And the man had 19 lawsuits against him, was on probation, didn't have to tell her that, and can perform all the same operations, didn't have medical malpractice insurance, and actively advertised to the Vietnamese refugee population. He is Caucasian.
Yeah.
He did not hire an anesthesiologist that day. We tried to sue him. We never got any money from him. He lost his license for 2 years and then continued to practice on probation until he died.
Yeah. I just want to hold space. I've shared with you, and I haven't probably shared on the show, but my loss included malpractice and incompetence too. And I think it's just another level of rage when you recognize there's the rage that I know you admitted and felt when you found out, like, this was an elective surgery, why would you go? And then there's the rage of this was 100% preventable if the laws were different, if he was not,
you know. I mean, what's the point of being on probation your whole life?
If you can still cause harm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as you said earlier on, you didn't know early on. That was not a conversation. You just knew your mom went in for surgery and something went wrong. But you learned later on, and I know I'm mixing up the timelines, you learned later on this was not her first plastic surgery either.
Yeah. So when I finally get access to the depositions, I see that on her medical forms at the consult with the plastic surgeon, she had gotten breast implants and maybe like another like chin thing or a nose thing. Like it was just like some minor stuff. And I was like, what? Like I was reading this alone because I couldn't talk to my family about it. And I'm sitting there going like, it sent chills through my body because then it triggered a childhood memory where I was like, oh, that one day she came home late at night and I wasn't allowed to touch her. You know, like, what was that about? And I'm like, oh my God, that must have been when she got breast implants, right? So there was so much that wasn't ever spoken about. And I also remember 2 years after she died, my like crush in high school at the time brought me a newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner, I think. And he was like, your family's in the paper. And this is a big city. It's an hour away. Like this is a big major paper in the city. And I'm like, I started reading about it. And it's like my brother's offering quotes. It really details what happened with the doctor. And I'm sitting here learning it for the first time. And my crush already knew more than I did. That's how secretive it was.
Except, did you ever wonder, now I'm going to ask this question and probably the answer is no because they don't want to talk about it. But why was your brother willing to talk to a newspaper about it and not? Okay.
Well, you know, I think there's something around like the law, like if a lawyer asks something or a doctor asks something or a newspaper asks something, like it's so official that you feel like there's compliance there. But I think also there's this recurring line, Ba Wadi Susan, like let it go. Move on. Living in the past, what is that going to get you? And as Confucian Buddhists, it's like you're breaking the harmony if you're talking about that. It's going to make everyone sad. Why are you going to do that? You know, and it's like, so that's where the mind F is.
Gotcha.
Is that they can talk to like formal entities and institutions, but not inside the home.
Yeah. And so there you are, 11-year-old, reeling from this most profound loss. But that's not the only loss. And I wanted to just explore with you sort of the cascading or the secondary losses, which I think get so much less press. I mean, pardon the reference there, but I think for all of us, we have these secondary losses and they get so much less press. Your dad's trying to now, he was already a manicurist, but he was not the CEO of the operation. So now your dad is trying to manage the shops. There's a cleave between your mom's side of the family and your dad, who were really important. Can you tell us, when you look back now, or at the time, did you see them as secondary losses? How did 11-year-old you make sense of these cascading changes? Now, we all experience secondary losses in the wake of a death loss. They can include tangible things like the loss of a home or special objects. It can be a change or loss of financial stability. For many, these secondary losses come in the form of significant changes or complete severing of other relationships in our lives. And still for others, it's an existential or spiritual crisis. Perhaps you've experienced that, leading you to ask, why do bad things happen to good people? When we come back, Susan reflects on how she experienced the cascading losses that happened after the death of her mother. You're listening to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Keefauver. I wonder if you're looking for more grief resources, access to practices and tools that will help this journey of grief suck a little bit less, or maybe just more ways to connect with me and my work. Currently, I drop into your inbox with my not-so-regular newsletter to share a bit of wisdom I think you might want to know about. Sometimes that takes the form of essays, or a journal prompt, or even a guided meditation that will help ease your suffering. Other times, it includes news about events I'm hosting or participating in that I think you might like. I often invite you to write me a personal note, too, answering a question I have about how you're moving through your grief. Though I currently show up in your inboxes in the form of that newsletter, I'm making a change. Why? Because now more than ever, I'm passionate about creating meaningful, intentional community and offering you more in-depth insight into my work. Now, life is happening so fast, and I want a place for us to gather where we can slow down, dive in, and figure out how to metabolize it all together. So, drum roll please, I'm launching a Substack called AFGO with Lisa Keefauver. AFGO, if you haven't heard me talk about it on the show, from the stage, or in my book, stands for Another Fucking Growth Opportunity. Yes, of course, I had to get in a judicious use of cussing, but rest assured, my friends, like this show and really everything I do, it will offer thoughtful, meaningful, and practical guidance on how to center aliveness in a world full of loss. You can find the link to subscribe by visiting my website, lisakeefauver.com, or heading directly to Substack and subscribing at afgowithlisakeefauver.substack.com. I look forward to seeing you there.
It was utterly devastating. Before my mom died, we were 13 people in a 4-bedroom house. 2 years after my mom dies, we are now 3 people in a 4-bedroom house. I mean, at this point, my brothers have gone to college, and
Yes.
But my grandparents and my aunts moved out because they're like, well, eventually your dad's going to remarry. And I said, okay, what's the big deal? And then they're like, well, this is better this way. But what that means is they also left the nail salons, and we were all powering the nail salons together. So now my dad has 2 nail salons and no employees. He has to sell off one, and then they go open their own nail salon. And then it's like eventually like our business erodes. And then at the time, what's super awkward is they were like, well, why don't you come live with us? And it was really hard for me because they're like, don't you love grandma's food? Like, don't you love us? And I was like, well, yeah. So now I'm 13 and I'm feeling like I have to choose between my family.
Yeah.
And that So I decide to stay with my dad, of course, but like that also creates a rift between my two brothers because they have a difference in opinion of like what is going on and who you should side with. Well, even though my aunts and my grandparents left us, it broke our nuclear family too with my brothers. It was awful. Different stories
about who's choosing to leave or what that separation is.
And I wasn't privy to any of those details.
Right. And so it's you, your sister was still at home, and your dad.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody's talking about your mom's death. Nobody's talking about the fact that all of a sudden the family is not together.
And now it's my dad's like, okay, you guys need to come work at the nail salon more. And it's like, okay, of course. Like, of course we're going to do that. Like, sure, we'd like to spend more weekends with our friends, but okay, this is what we have to do, you know? Yeah. But at the same time, like, I'm an American. I'm just like, I just want to go to Turnabout, you know? And my dad's like, no, you can't. You know, like, it's like, I'm still also just a child.
Right, exactly. Wanting to be having the everyday normalcy of childhood and teenagehood. Yeah.
But now I have to go help at the nail salon because everything has fallen apart.
Yeah. And yet there's then this turning point where you become a young adult. You have this pressure from the family to have a responsible job, right? To go to college, have a career. You end up at Harvard.
Yep. Just because I watched Legally Blonde and it inspired me to apply. True story.
Amazing.
Thank you, Reese Witherspoon.
Exactly. I can imagine that's not a totally unfamiliar story. She's probably responsible for quite a few. But one of the things that you talk about in the book, again, I just appreciated the way so much later on through all the investigations, and I'm trying to remember the timing of when you really started investigating your mom, what happened with your mom and the doctor, that you now felt this pressure. Well, I have to go like to school, get a quote unquote real job, maybe be a lawyer, I think was.
Yeah, I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. I mean, I wanted that for myself, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. What was that young adulthood like? Also, you're probably one of the only peers who has lost a parent.
Yeah.
At that time.
And I was one of the few people who had a dad who was a manicurist, you know? And
that's right.
And I remember we just went around the table at the dining hall and they're like, what do you do? What do your parents do? And I said, he's a manicurist. And they thought I was lying.
Yeah.
And that I was like joking. And it was very awkward and strange. I think when I went to Harvard, I knew I was very achievement oriented and wanted the approval of others and mentors, like adults, trusted adults. And I was like, wow, I've been living a life to get their approval. What would it look like if I did everything for me? And so when I was at Harvard, I was really on a spiritual quest to really dig into my own worthiness and do what I wanted, irrespective of my father. And he was like, a lot of pressure to take the LSATs to become a lawyer. I interviewed a lot of human rights lawyers. And I was like, actually, that day to day, it sounds glamorous, but I actually don't want it. And then I found myself in a Korean yoga cult. Yeah. I thought it was
such an interesting turn. That's such an interesting turn to the story. I thought, I did not see this coming. Except, does it feel fair to say that craving for being seen and held and acknowledged and loved in a kind of warm way, like almost, of course, you ended up there?
You know, I think now when I wrote that chapter, my editors like don't understand why this is here. And then I was like, I really had to make meaning from something that felt so natural and ordinary to me. But the thesis here is I didn't feel like I belonged in my own family.
No. And this place made you feel.
Yeah, I definitely belonged. I had to pay to belong. But here's the thing that's different between cults and families. The rules don't change so much. They're very consistent rules, actually. And you know how to ascend in terms of being worthy there. Whereas I think with families, like it's like the rules are like really gray.
It's a moving target, maybe a little.
Totally. And like, you know, there's always new programs they want you to buy in the cult. But it was still like, I felt like it was a level of consistency. And actually there was a maternal figure there, Michelle Neem, who becomes my like master, my instructor. And I feel really safe with her. And she's really is listening to me and she's feeding me and she's like becoming a family figure, but I'm paying for it.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to name, and that's interesting that the publisher, the editors and you were kind of like trying to figure out the place for it. But as the reader, as just the life experience, the social worker in me, I don't know, whatever, I was like, not that I wanted that for you, but it made total sense to me that there was this landing place for you to, I mean, you spent your whole life like, listen to me, see me, care about what happened to me. And again, to your point, I'm not here advocating cults, by the way, just to make that clear. And I can see the draw of that.
Yeah. Cults are meeting a market demand, right?
Yeah.
Like we all want to be loved, seen, and celebrated. And so, yeah, they capitalize on a vulnerable person. But that's why cults are in business, people, is because families are dysfunctional.
Yeah. I don't know if you've been on Ronit Plank's podcast. She was a guest on my show. She has a beautiful podcast called Let's Talk Memoir, giving her a shout out today. But her mother had followed the Bhagwan into India. And she had some of that same, like later on, like as a child, she felt left and abandoned. But later on, she could understand that draw of her mom wanting to feel a part of something and to feel belonging. So I think that's part of what allowed me to see in your story a little bit, you know, how you got there. You ended up getting yourself out of that. But at one of the times that you were sending, I think, trying to share this with your family, and you sent to your brother some law of attraction or something, maybe is the context of that.
The secret.
And he sort of, it was another time when he said to you, like, hey, you know, if you really believe in the law of attraction, why don't you move forward instead of like staying stuck in your problems? And it was another time where you really talked about that this isn't just my grief, that this is our grief to carry together. And part of why I'm not able to move forward is because I'm trying to carry it alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, when we didn't talk about it, that's when she truly died for me.
Yeah. So tell us about the turn then to, you know, I got to know all the answers. I got to investigate. I got to hold this guy accountable. I've got to, you know, there was a real surge, probably driven by a lot of rage, obviously, necessarily, but to get an answer.
Yeah. I was in business school. I went to Yale. And I remember my teachers were just like, you can have whatever you want in life. Like anything you want, you can pivot there, you can do it. And I'm sitting there going like, whoa, I am so privileged. I've got 2 Ivy League degrees. The probability and the odds of me being here in this moment, listening to this amazing professor just make us feel so great about ourselves, given my parents' journey, I was just sitting here going like, I have the privilege now. I am not a child anymore. I'm not defenseless. I am speaking in my native language, which is English. How did this doctor get away with white-collar crime like this? And I'm like, if I stand for social justice, if I want my father to be in a better place financially,
yeah,
I am in this very life stage position to do it. I know how to work the system. I know I have a network. I know what I can do this.
Yeah.
I am capable. You know, like I was not capable when I was 11.
Of course.
And at the time, my 19-year-old brother was the surrogate to my father, essentially. Like he translated for the doctors to understand what was going on. He helped my father make the call.
I was just going to say, he had to make the decision of taking your mom off life support.
Because my dad, you know, had elementary English, right, as a competency. So I was sitting there going like, the time is now. I can avenge my mother's death. And also Google has way more information than in 1996. And so I was just like, all right, here we go. Let's throw it down. So then I was like, all right, I'm going, because I specialize in marketing. I was like, all right, I'm going to have a multi-pronged marketing campaign, give him targeted Facebook ads just to him to creep him out. Then I'm going to buy a billboard right by his clinic where he's still on probation. Then I'm going to get an expose on him. Then I'm going to form a class action lawsuit with all the women that he targeted. And this time we're going to also use the angle of like targeting Vietnamese people. Because before it wasn't really all connected together as a class action lawsuit. And I was like, well, what if I called each of those victims up and let's resurrect this again? Like I was like I was, when people go, oh, I'm obsessed about it. I was like,
No, you were like, this is
this is CSI amateur, but me, you know? And so I'm like really researching him. He's still alive. You know, I'm like, and he's on probation. How fucked up is this system? And then I was like, oh, I'm going to graduate soon. I don't have a job yet. Like, my boyfriend, am I moving to Seattle? Does he love me? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to move to Seattle. I'm going to get a job. And then I'm going to get this man.
I got to get a solid foundation underneath me, and then I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, because I was like interviewing for all these jobs. It was just like a little too much, plus avenging my mother's death. You know what I mean? You have to like
have a lot on your plate. Which thing are you going to do?
Yeah, space it out. So then I moved to Seattle, and then I'm like, okay, I finally got a job. Let me look him up. I call my friend who went to Harvard Law School. I was like, Kathy, tell me what I can do to this guy. And she's like, he's dead. I was like, no, he's not, dude. Like, and then she was like, she sent me the article. It was just like, I was so hung up. Like, I didn't recently Google, has the man died? That's the last thing I was thinking he was going to do. But my back is now against the wall. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, how do you have an enemy if your enemy is dead?
I also want to say again, like, of course, I said that before, like, of course, maybe you end up called, like, I wonder if there was this part of like this, I don't know how old you were when you started that sort of avenge thing.
About 30.
30?
Yeah.
It's like, it's the power and the agency that 11-year-old you didn't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
but then,
so,
yeah.
I'm not good or bad, but it's like, and it got taken to like kind of this, I mean, as you describe in the book, you sort of had a CSI network of photos and, I'm picturing red threads and a cork board or, But in a way, there was something about taking control in a way that 11-year-old helpless you didn't get to. Does that ring true to you?
100%. And I think like after going to all these institutions, meeting very successful people, like taking all these classes, I was like, oh, that's it. Like, there's no other major secret here, guys. Like, you just network and do research and take action. Like, I was like, okay. And now I'm on the same playing field and I realize there's no other secret sauce here. I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah.
So anyways,
so you hit this wall. He's dead. So now what? What do you do with all this rage, with this information?
One of my favorite lines in the book. And then I was like, my back was against the wall. So then I did what anyone does when they want to get distracted. I got married.
That's right. That's right. So then there was that. Yeah.
Yeah. I get married and my mom pays me a visit. Like, of course, I'm very cognizant on that day. She's not there. And then I'm eating the dinner finally. We've done our vows. And then it's like, my girlfriend comes up to me. She's like, your aunt needs you. And I was like, what? And then my aunt is spirit channeling my mom in front of my new Korean in-laws, in front of my business school grad classmates. I was like,
who are not down with the fact that this is in your family, that there are spirit channelers, right?
Yeah.
Which, so it's like not surprising to you, but you're kind of looking around like, ooh, how's this going to go down in my new
but I was
world?
But I was also really thrilled, right? Because I was like,
yeah,
good. I was looking for a sign. Yeah, like, I'm glad you're here. And so then the chase continues. And I realize, like, oh, the enemy, like, the person I'm like, what is going to give me closure? It's not this man and raining hell on him. It's actually understanding my family and learning to love them while learning me and learning about the truth of what happened to her. That's what's going to give me closure.
Yeah.
So then
and learning more about her, just who she was.
Yeah. So then I go on a wild goose chase. I track down the plastic surgeon's kids, spirit channelers, psychics, read thousands of pages of depositions, go to Vietnam several times. And every time I learn something new, I put it in a one-woman show. So I'm like live processing with the public, like what I'm learning.
Let's pause that let's pivot to that, because here you were, business school, maybe you were going to be a lawyer. You had this feeling that that you're an artist, which you knew was not going to go down well in your family, who wanted you to do something practical. But you were taking just a class, a performance class, not necessarily knowing that all of this effort to avenge your mom was going to turn into a performance. What happened? 5 minutes turned into the idea for what we now know is 140 pounds?
Yeah, I mean, like when you have a movie, there's like a plot A and then plot B. And like plot A, Susan wants to like avenge her mother's death and know her mother. Plot B is Susan was disappointed with the adult she became, right? Like, Years prior, I had done stand-up comedy. I was totally in my orbit. I totally loved it. And then I got heckled, and it was traumatizing, and it was awful. And I walked away from the stage being like, who am I kidding? Like, I thought I was so good, but I had headlined Purple Onion. I was at Caroline's on Broadway. Like, things were going well for me, but I felt so ashamed that it bombed so hard. And so a part of me knew that now here I am, just like a vendor contractor at Microsoft, like doing stuff now on like cybersecurity project management. Like, it's like the last thing I thought I'd ever do, but I was living this life for my dad because now I had a 401k and I could give him money every month, and that's being the dutiful daughter. And then at the same time, I was like, wow, like I hate every day of my life. I hate it. And so when I got married, my dad and aunts pressured me to have kids. And I'm like, one, how can I become a mother if I've never known my own? And two, I'm like, how can I tell my kid be what you want in life if I never did it myself? And so I needed to deal with that baggage. And so me and my MBA husband time boxed this, and we said, give it 2 years. Susan, you get the wiggles out. Do everything you want. And then we're going to like really have this serious talk about having kids. I was like, okay. Because otherwise I was just too on the fence about it. And I just felt like it was too big of a decision. And so I said, okay, great. So I got some structure, went to the solo performance class, and I did my class capstone project was this absurdist thing like Andy Kaufman. Like I like fed everyone raisins, and then I like was in a rainbow poncho, and then the lights dimmed and I kept almost touching a hammer. And you're like, is this bee going to kill me? And then I would just like, it went on for 10 minutes. And then I was like, oh, it was great. Like again, headline, not intending to talk about my family tragedy.
Right. I'm in fact opposite. I'm just going to be absurdist and not talk about anything of substance. Yeah.
But it was on the first day of that class when they're like, tell a 5-minute story. I'm like, cool. I wanted to avenge my mother's death, so I went to look for a killer. Like I thought that was a cool story. Like only my husband knows it, Anyway, so the class ends. I'm like trying improv stuff. I'm just trying to get on stage because stage is so scary for me. And then I hear that there's a solo performance festival and I can have a 10 or 25-minute slot. And I'm like, cool. I am going to get the 25-minute slot. I'm going to put on a show that's more absurdist. Then I will take up my IUD. Then I will be done. Like, it was just like the hit list for my like life, life
I'm going to move through ABC. All good.
Yeah. So I go to a workshop to prepare. And then the coach was like, can we talk about the avenge my mom's death stuff? And I was like, nobody wants to talk about sad stuff. Like, I'm not allowed to talk about it at home. Like, I was just telling you that as an aside of how I got back in. And then she was like, I was like, it's I'm not allowed to talk about this. It's not very important to anybody. And she's like, and I'm like sobbing while I'm telling her. And then she's like, seems like it's important to you. 2 weeks before the show date, I change everything, whip out these Post-it notes, make a script. I've never done this before. 25 minutes on stage. Dr. X, How I Avenged My Mother's Death. That was episode 1. Then we have 3 episodes, 140 pounds, and then the extended version that I took on tour when I was 6 months pregnant.
Which is amazing. I wish I could have seen it because just reading about that tour, and also, I mean, I don't know how you think about yourself in relationship to your mom, likeness or not likeness, but as I'm hearing you tell this story and as I was reading it, but just hearing you retell this story and the decisions and the transitions you make, talk about courageous and tenacious. I mean, do you see that about yourself and your mom? How do you think about those qualities and characteristics? When we come back, Susan explores the qualities she discovered about herself and her mother and how that came to be in her one-woman show, Over 140 Pounds. I'm your host, Lisa Keefauver, and you're listening to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. Since you're listening to this show, you know that navigating the messy reality of grief in a world obsessed with top 10 lists and productivity can feel, well, lonely and confusing. That's why my book, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, an uncensored guide to navigating loss, I created a safe place to be inside the messiness of it all. I've been told that it feels like your wise best friend offering you a comprehensive and compassionate guide to navigating loss. I share personal and professional wisdom alongside the lessons I've learned from clinicians, authors, poets, and friends. In place of rigid instructions and must-do checklists, this book invites reflections, encourages self-compassion, and explores the therapeutic power of humor with, yes, of course, a bit of profanity. I'm thrilled to share the book is being chosen as top grief reads by folks like Maria Shriver of the Sunday Paper and the team at Help Text 2. You can pick up your copy at your favorite independent bookstore, online bookseller, or even on your next trip, as it's in more than 50 airport bookstores across the country. I've linked it in the show notes too for today's episode. And to my UK friends, thanks to the Hachette Group, my book can now be found in your favorite local bookstores too. Oh, and if you're into listening instead of reading, which by the way, still counts as reading, I narrated the book too, so you can head to Audible or wherever you get your audiobooks.
Yeah. There's a line. By the way, you can watch 140 Pounds. You can stream it from my website.
All right. I will put the link in the show notes for today's episode.
Yes, please.
For sure.
But there's a line in this show where I go, my mother was 140 pounds and I was 140. And I discovered this in the depositions that I'm like, holy moly, like we were the same weight, even though she lied on her medical forms to say she was 110, right?
Yes.
But I was like, we're cut. My body is her last gift to me. You know what I mean? Like it's holding her DNA. And I think that was like, it's like such an obvious like hero's journey. Like on the outside, you'll be like, you're your mother's daughter. But like, seriously, I didn't know, right? Because remember, I only had 7 memories of her. So it took me all these shows to know.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the very act of then putting it on tour and like telling it and then pivoting into the arts. Like, yeah, I am my mother's daughter.
Yeah.
And I remember an article came out in the Seattle Times, like they were just like profiling a local bookstore in my neighborhood. And they were like, and Susan Liu came by before the books were coming out just to check that they had them in stock. And I was like, I read that and I was like, huh. And then someone mentioned to me, they were like, isn't that a funny line? And then I was like, yeah, because it makes me sound like a hustler. And then they were like, you're your mother's daughter. And I was like, yeah, because at first I felt almost ashamed when I heard when I heard their interpretation. But then I was like, yeah, my mom would have do that too. Yeah, you want to make sure it's in stock. I'm like your local author. Like, you want me to sign it? You know, like, so anyways, it's been a very beautiful journey to, as I peel back the layers of the onion, I was my mother's daughter the whole time, you know? But I wouldn't have known that unless I've gone on this journey and gotten pushback from my family.
Yeah. And gotten to, you took that investigation of like what happened to my mom and the doctor and that avenging, and you really took it to this tenacious investigation of getting to know your family, to getting to know your brothers, your dad, this kind of the story of how they fled to the U.S. And in the iteration that you write about in the book, I guess the most recent, although maybe not the most recent now that we're talking, but the one that you took on the road, your mom talking to each of you and kind of answering the questions that each of you had, which was so powerful, allowed you to see your siblings and even your dad in a different way than you saw them. So can you talk about how getting to know your family in a different way by researching and preparing for this show?
Yeah.
Like, what has that shifted for you or not? Because I heard you say at the top of the show, we still don't talk about.
Yeah. There was certainly a turn. I would say reading the depositions and seeing their firsthand accounts of them explaining what my mom meant to them or what they remembered of my mom. I mean, it wasn't a lot of text, but in each one, especially from my father not really still understanding how and why she died. He admitted that to the lawyers, My brothers talking about their special memories with my mom was eating food and like even though she worked 7 days a week, like on Sundays, it was a truncated day. And in the mornings, we would all watch Paris by Night together and eat my grandma's soup. And then after work, we would go to like either Tamales Bay and go eat oysters together as a family. Like through that, like Ma did not have alone time.
No.
it was always about the family. So I'm like, I'm seeing how dedicated she is to the family,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes I felt this abandonment of like, oh my God, why'd you do that? You ruined everything. But then at the same time, I'm like, oh, she's so committed. And then what really struck me is my brother Hang, who he was the one who said the secret comment, but he was just like, he was like, yeah, my mom would call me like every week from the nail salon and check in with me. Or it was like 3 times a week or something, but
Yeah.
at college. And he was a freshman at UC Berkeley. And then I thought, oh my God, he was a freshman at UC Berkeley. Like, he wasn't thinking about partying or girls. He didn't have a mom. And the force that like pushed him and directed him his whole life was like gone. So there's so much that they haven't been able to tell me in person. And I'm kind of like, was she not important to you? Like, why can't we talk about this? Like, are you withholding things to be mean to me? Like, what is this really about? And then when I read those depositions, I was like, oh my God, like, of course they suffered. Of course they're sad.
Yeah.
Of course they grieve in their own way.
Own way.
And it was then when I was trying to piece together, my God, they are actually protecting themselves. My God, we all have our own demons that we're struggling through. And actually how they're showing up right now, that's their best.
Yeah.
That's the best that they can fathom.
We're all doing the best we can until we know better, and then we do better. You know, that's it. But do you think I hear compassion in that realization?
Totally. And it was after I had a kiddo and visited my dad in Texas. And he finally told me, he was like, we were talking about emotions because Asian masculinity, like, and in general, like, just mental health is so stigmatized in our community. And he was just kind of like, he was essentially saying, I don't talk about this because I'm protecting me from you. Like, I'm protecting you because I don't know what would happen
if I opened.
You know? Yeah. And like, because he was like, do you understand there's this line in the play where he was like, Mahilong, like, do you understand? Like, when you want me to tell a sad story, it takes me 2 or 3 days to be okay again. Do you understand? So that's the extent that he can communicate it, right? And so then I started to go, Susan, he is giving you an indirect boundary. And he's also telling you he doesn't have the capacity and tools to do this because of the generation he came from. It's not that he's trying to be mean to you, but it's actually more of a cultural, generational thing in terms of just their understanding of tools, what's normalized, what's okay. Does it make you weak and vulnerable? Are you taking away from the collective? Like all of that. And it's just like, I just kind of wanted someone to like be so explicit with me about it so that I could just like understand. But because we're such an indirect communicating type of family and really we just communicate through food as our love language, I was just kind of like standing around just like feeling victimized the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to go do my own stuff to realize their reaction to me is not about me.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to depersonalize it. And when I could do that, I could really focus on my healing. And guess what? I did my turn. I wasn't needing them to give it to me. And then they all inevitably did their own turn.
Yeah. That's so powerful. And to your point, which was they were doing the best that they could and that you really figured out what you needed to do to give to yourself, you know, what you needed, which is
a one-woman show.
It's a one-woman show. Not everybody's path, but I
not recommended, guys.
Well, it's okay. I know. That's why I always say, like, you don't also have to create a podcast and do all the things I've done either, but just you have to do something with it. You know, I'm wondering about the closing. I think it's the closing scene. Your mom visits and has kind of a conversation. You're having a conversation with your mom. I don't know if that's the closing scene in the one-woman show, or is it?
Yeah. That's from 140 pounds.
From 140 pounds. And I'm not going to read it, but it was just so beautiful the way you went back and forth. But also one of the many times actually it was in tears reading your book was sort of, you know, I think she was trying to like focus on school. She was trying to like get you to, you know, you were asking questions back and forth. And then you just desperately said like, you know, but there's so many other questions I have unanswered. You know, some of them were, you tell me of all our happy memories together or moments together. And when I light incense and ask for your help, does it really work? And how would I know for sure? And all the questions we want to ask our parents. Do you believe in destiny or free will? Like the big existential questions that you don't get to ask. And I don't know, I just felt like little you and little me and little all of us who don't get the chance, for everybody who's lost somebody, who don't get the chance to ask those questions. What was it like to perform that? What did you, because you wrote it, which meant it was something deep that you needed, but then to perform it over and over again.
That was before. And one line was, if I have a daughter, how can I make her love her body?
Her body. I know, I should have read that one. Yeah. And how can I summon you when I need you?
Yeah. My third iteration of my shows, I did 100 questions that I wish I could ask her.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And then in the 140 pounds, I truncated it to 20. And it's like, when we can put voice to something, when we can name our shame around something, we can form a liberation around something, we can release this unspoken, and there is this new power that we can derive from it, something that we have reclaimed in ourselves, something that we don't need to hide from. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they say, you are only as sick as your secrets. And every single time I perform this on stage, 60 times in 1 year to 7,000 people, I released it over and over again because I wanted to know those answers. But I wanted you to know those answers so that with the people that are still alive for you.
Yeah.
I want you to not go through my hell. So can you make your own turn? It was this like cathartic thing for me that I'm doing this for me, but I'm doing it for you. And when you do it for you, you do it for me. Like I wanted to like rise to this new way of just being interconnected with other people. And that is the gift of grief, is that I can experience love and joy and connectedness in a very new and deeper way, right? And that's post-traumatic growth. So for me to do the 20 questions every single night and fully commit and find each line in a new way and be like just earnest about it, it was sending off a wish to my mother, but it was also sending off a wish to all of fucking humanity.
Yeah. Don't wait. Ask these questions. Well, that's why, thank you for that answer. So powerful. And that's why, I'm sure, why it brought me to tears too. But I think it really reminded me of the power of giving voice to something, whether that's on the written page or giving voice. Some of my most cathartic moments in my own grief have been speaking out loud in my own home and asking these questions to my husband, the questions that I wish I had answers to. And when I work with people, is to say, it's not too late. It's not always about getting the answer. It's about asking the question. And then like allowing for that follow through and that catharsis. Of course we want it. And to your point, the more you in this gift of this show, asking the questions out loud is part of why we need to be continuing to have these conversations. Right. Why I do the show, the work that you are doing, all of the work is like, don't wait.
Right.
Because you even said, and I think maybe when your ma spoke to you, or maybe this was, I don't remember, the uncle, but somebody said to you, like, also your dad's still here. You can ask him the questions. Like, what questions do you want to know about him? So we all have, and it made me think about it. Like, think about my 92-year-old dad. My dad is still alive. Amazing. What are the questions that I haven't asked him? Has it changed how you've shown up with other people in your life? Your husband, your dad, thinking about these questions?
Girl, I live like I'm mortal. You know what I mean? Because oftentimes we are putting things off. We're going to do it later. We'll resolve it later. We'll get to it later. And here's the big moment here, guys, is my mom died when she was 38. There was no later for her. And my last day with her, boy, how many times have I wished I could recreate that scene and say something different. And so I'm encouraging people to live like you're mortal. Think about it to yourself. If you really only had 1 year left, what would you do differently with your time, your money, your loved ones? What else do you want to do? And the question is why are we not doing it? Maybe we'll all like be these cyborgs that live to 1,000. Okay, maybe we'll be in space. Or maybe we're going to die between like 55 to 85.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, like that's when like deaths are starting to happen. So can we live like we're mortal? can we live in this place of this boldness of
being present
and knowing that this may be the last time I have with you. So how do I want, it wasn't what I did, it was how I made you feel. Am I living heart to heart with you or not? And if not, what's blocking that? Now I say all this, and my neighbor was just like, how's your relationship with your dad? I'm also getting to a place of it's neutral positive, you know, like he's told me what his boundaries are. We pretend like I have never written this book and I'm not a storyteller on intergenerational healing. Like we pretend that that does not exist.
Yeah.
So cool. How can we have a relationship that's respectful and
the relationship
enough?
that he can have? I mean,
that's right. That's right. So yes, I want the rainbows and butterflies. I want us to like be like kumbayaing. And also I want a relationship and I have to also do it on other people's terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I so appreciate that reminder that, again, the living like we're going to die, which newsflash, 100% of us going to do that, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to create a one-woman show or quit our job or have a butterfly and rainbow reparative relationship. And it's an invitation to ask ourselves what matters most right now and how are we going to go after it? It's not the completion, but like, where is our energy going to be going towards that?
100%. And it's how do I learn to love my family and love myself? Because I got boundaries too. And for me, it is so easy for me to step right back into 11-year-old Susan and assume all of the behavioral norms that I knew. And part of this journey that it is to be human is to say, what is actually going to work for me so that I can show up as the best me for you? And sometimes that's also my own boundaries and discovering that and speaking voice to that, which is terrifying in a family.
Apps. I mean, I think everybody listening knows that from their whatever their family dynamics might look like, yours might not. We all can, if we're not being intentional to your own growth. When we get back in a room, I was literally just having this conversation with a client the other day who had to move home with their family, if we're not intentional, we can all become our 11-year-old us or our 16-year-old us, or like we go back to that place. And so to bring intention with that and to bring our healing self, because we're just on a journey, we're just on a journey. We're not going to get it figured out, but we're going to just keep learning and being courageous and tenacious and dynamic. And that's how I think about you as I've gotten to know you through your book. And now I can't wait to go watch. I didn't know we could watch it online. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to share that with the listeners. Susan Lieu, thank you so much for writing this book, The Manicurist Daughter. Thank you for being in conversation with me today. It was so beautifully special.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so important. It is so needed. Because guess what, everybody? If we don't deal with our grief, it's going to come anyways. You know what I mean? Like it's going to interrupt our lives.
It's going to deal with us. It's going to deal with us.
So might as well direct it head on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. Listeners, check out the links in the show notes to get your copy of The Manicurist Daughter, to check out the show. And where can people find you? Because I know that you're going to be creating some new works and we want people to be able to find you wherever you are.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Susan Lieu, Lieu. And I also have a podcast called Model Minority Moms. And then just go on my website, susanlieu.me, to subscribe to my newsletter.
And thanks so much.
Thank you.
I hope you learned as much as I did from this powerful episode with Susan Lieu. As I mentioned in our conversation, I've read many memoirs exploring loss and grief. And this one really stood out as she ruthlessly explored the impact of culture, intergenerational trauma, justice, and legacy. You can pick up your copy of this award-winning book, The Manicurist Daughter, wherever you love to shop for books. I'll also drop a link in the show notes for today's episode too. Now, don't forget to look for video clips of our conversation on social media at Lisa Keefauver MSW, or watch the full video conversation on my YouTube channel at Lisa Keefauver MSW. If you loved our conversation, learned something from it, it would mean the world to us if you do just a few simple things. First, share the episode with another griever who might just need it too. If you do it on socials, don't forget to tag us. 2, make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you listened or watched this one. That way you won't miss the next episode when it drops. And while you're there, number 3, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review about why you love the episode, the show in general, or what you've learned. Thanks to Kyle Smith from Alafia Sounds for the music for this podcast. Okay, my grieving friends, remember that yes, grief is a sneaky bitch, but don't worry, I've got your back. Until next time, I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding you in my heart.